Okay, everyone, I'm going to get started. It's 1:30. I'd like to get started on time. Today's presentation is on remediation funding sources and financial assurance. I am Christina Page. I work in the Division of Remediation Management, and I am the new chair of the department's or Site Remediations Training Committee, taking over for Lynn Mitchell. So I'd like to welcome everyone in person. For those of you on the webinar, there's about 60 or so people in the room. For the people in the room, there's supposed to be about 400 people on the webinar. By the way, for the webinar participants, today's presentation was supposed to begin at 1:30. Some of you had inquired through text messaging and messaging on the webinar that you were concerned that we weren't starting. You could log in and begin at 1, but today's presentation is for 1:30. So if you're here for CECs and on the webinar for CECs, the board has approved 2 regulatory CECs. In order to get those continuing education credits, the in-person attendees can sign in and sign out. And for those of you on the webinar, you need to answer 3 out of the 4 quiz questions that we're going to ask today, and you must remain on the webinar for the entire presentation. So this is our process. Since the CECs are approved, the department compiles a list and gives it to the LSRPA. You will then receive an email from the LSRPA that will give you a link to access to the certificate, pay $25, and your certificate will be awarded. And this process should occur in the next couple of weeks since the CECs were approved already by the Site Remediation Board. So I was just mentioning the quiz questions that we have to ask for the webinar participants. When one of these screens come up that says test your knowledge, I will get up and I will say the quiz question, which today the test your knowledge example question is RFS is the acronym for what? Really fun stuff, remediation fact sheet, or remediation funding source. And then for those of you on the webinar, you'll have a minute to respond. In this case, this is not really fun stuff, but it is in fact a presentation, or RFS is what our remediation funding source is what RFS stands for. For those of you in the room, please mute your cell phones. We would really appreciate that. If you do need to take a call, please take it outside of the room. And during most of the presentations afterwards, we will take questions. So please wait for the microphone if you're in the room. The webinar participants cannot hear your questions if you do not have a mic in front of you. So while everybody else in this room can hear you, anybody on the webinar cannot hear your question. For you on the webinar, wait for the question period to open up and then you can begin to type in your questions. We'll take some of the questions in the room. I'll take as many as I can on the webinar, and any of the questions on the webinar that don't get answered, we will respond to you. So please fill out the course evaluation form and remember to sign in and sign out today. The course evaluation form I'm going to show to the folks in the audience. It's pink. Actually, Nicole is over there. She's holding it up. And for anybody on the webinar, you have access to the course evaluation. If you could please fill out the course evaluation and email it to the SRWM training email that is at the top of the page, that will come to me and I would be able to look at what you have to say. And now I'd like to welcome Bill Call.
Want me to just yell?
Yeah, just like I said.
Thank you. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the class. This is a topic that's near and dear to many of us that are involved in engineering controls and closing out sites. The course number I threw up there is mentioned as 2 regulatory credits were approved by the licensing board. Oh, wrong way, of course. First off, we always mention our sponsors. As a Board of Trustees member, I run into them at various functions in our annual conference. Without their support, we couldn't do what we do. also representing some of the best firms in the state. So if you see any names or want to contact anyone, just give me a shout after this presentation. Those are our gold and diamond sponsors. They're the important ones. Upcoming events. We got a breakfast coming up on the 17th, Ponzio's Diner. We have a steering committee meeting for the LSRPA on the 19th down in Mount Laurel, I believe at GEI's office. Also, probably one of the most important things I can mention today, our conference is coming up in February, the 4th and the 5th. I'm co-chair of the continuing ed committee, so I can tell you we got about 30 some odd courses, and Rose, you're on the conference committee, I think, and she's helping put it together. So if you have any questions, certainly find one of us. It's a fun event, good chance to meet people you haven't seen in 10, 15 years. I always run into people I haven't seen in a long time. So it's fairly inexpensive. The hotel room is going to probably cost you the most, but they sell out quick. So if you do want to go and get a hotel room anticipating bad weather, it's at the Hyatt in New Brunswick. Just some initiatives real quick. Most of you have seen all these before. We have member breakfasts. People get together for an hour and a half, 2-hour breakfast. Usually they're approved for 2 credits. Good chance to meet colleagues, eat a good breakfast, and learn something new. Several of our bot members were involved in the SARA 2.0 revisions, keeping tabs on it. You probably have seen some email blasts from the association on it. I won't get any detail. We're also involved in the SRAG meetings and all these other initiatives. There's a dispute resolution sounding board, sections of our website. So if there's disputes between LSRPs, you can get a third party or a third LSRP to render a decision or opinion. There's a sounding board, which is a really good initiative. I helped get off the ground. Dudley Warner, our association, really spearheaded it. But essentially, you can submit questions via email. A group of half dozen or so folks, usually LSRPs and attorneys, will bounce it back and forth, and someone will call you back confidentially and to give you an opinion, a consensus opinion. Obviously not to be used in key document submittals, but for smaller firms that need a reality check, it's a good tool. We've got several committees. We're always looking, our membership is growing. I think, Karen, what are we, 800 something people now, give or take? Give or take. We've got several committees. We're always looking for folks to get active in committees. As you get active, you work your way up to board of trustees, executive committee positions, etc. Won't go into any detail, but again, if you have any questions, see me after the class. And that is it.
Thanks. I don't have. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you to the LSRPA. They provided refreshments today. Always a pleasure. Okay, our first presentation.
What's up, everybody? Everybody hear me? Good, fantastic. My name is Atwood Davis. I'm the supervisor for the Remediation Funding Source Unit, otherwise known as the Remediation Funding Source Coordinator. Today, we are going to be talking to you about remediation funding source and financial assurance. So I know you're all excited because we're talking about money, which is what we want to talk about. One of the main themes today is that we're going to be talking about remediation funding source first in a lot of our sections, and then we will talk about financial assurance second. We're trying to keep it separate, distinct, just like the natural flow progression as things work anyway. Remediation funding source is money's posted for active remediation. You complete your remediation. Financial assurance is money dedicated to engineering controls post remediation. For the webinar audience, I encourage you guys to make the remediation cost review RFSFA form available to yourselves because we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. It gives you the opportunity to play along with us. For the public hearing room folks, you should have gotten that as part of your handout so you can follow along with us in general. Just know that occasionally we may call it the RCR form. That's our acronym. What we do mean is the Remediation Cost Review form. So before we get this thing really started, I like to start with a brief public participation. So if Christina, if you could kick the live feed camera on so that the webinar audience can see us.
Like this?
We don't have a live feed camera, is what you're telling me. So like the webinar can only see the slides and hear us. Got it. So I got dressed up for nothing. That's fantastic, but it's cool. I can paint an accurate portrait for them. So for my webinar folks, just know we got about 1,600 people in this room. We expanded recently. For your own edification, I'm kind of like a taller, more handsome version of Brad Pitt. And at times I have been referred to as the songbird of my generation.
Perhaps we're marginally good looking.
Don't laugh, public hearing room. I'm trying to sell the sizzle here. So folks, raise your hand if you're LSRP. I just want to see my LSRPs in the room. Fantastic. We got about 300 of them. Fantastic. LSRPs in the room, do me a favor. Raise your hand if you have a degree in finance, economics, accounting. I'll take business. Any business degrees? This is the point we're trying to make, folks. No hands. Well, one hand was raised, I think, for business, but he looked a little bit unsure, like he didn't want to admit to it. But the main point is the department is asking you to be responsible in guiding your clients with regards to establishing and maintaining RFS. And we're already at a distinct advantage because we're environmental professionals. We understand that. So the main goal of this presentation today is to give you assistance, to guide you through our process. We're going to give you a lot of information. I don't expect that you retain it all on the spot, but hopefully you have a nice reference guide moving forward that you can refer to when you need help. You can also always call myself, or you could call Jen McLeod. I promised I wouldn't call her a rock star today because that makes her feel a little bit upset. So we'll just say really awesome, Jennifer McLeod. We also got Joe Purse with us today. So what exactly is remediation funding source? Essentially a financial guarantee to the state and public that funds are available to conduct and complete a remediation should it be necessary. If a person responsible for conducting the remediation falls out of financial favor or they have a failure to remediate, the department has the ability to draw upon the funds and dedicate those funds to the remediation. In terms of our statutory and regulatory authority, Brownfield Contaminated Site Remediation Act, Chapter 3 is what gives us our statutory authority with regards to remediation funding source, and Subchapter 5 of the ARCS rule is what covers RFS from the regulatory standpoint. In terms of who has to establish a remediation funding source, really, if you're an ISRA case, if you're triggering ISRA, at some point in time you do have to post with us. For Spill Act subject parties, if there's a directive or a state agency or court has issued an order, you have to post a remediation funding source, or if you signed an administrative consent order. Sites that are subject to the provisions of direct oversight also have to post RFS. In terms of when do you have to establish, if a transaction is occurring real time on the spot and you're following a remediation certification, you have to post RFS at that point in time. We'll cover that in more detail later. If you're waiting for the transaction to occur until you hit the raw phase, once the raw has been submitted by the LSRP, you essentially have 14 days to post with us. And then for non-ISRA cases, it's going to be as ordered or directive in the order or directive. In terms of direct oversight, within 90 days of the event that caused you to trigger direct oversight. To give you an update, SARA 2.0, we know a lot changed in this world, a lot of updates to statutes, soon to be updates to regulations. From the remediation funding source perspective, really the most significant change to Chapter 3 of Brownfields was that we are bringing back surety bonds as an acceptable form of remediation funding source. It's a financial mechanism. The statute stipulates that the use of the bond has to be in the department's model language. That language isn't quite available yet. To give you an update where we are, we have drafted it. It is undergoing internal review at the moment. When that has been completed, our goal is to get it to the outside surety companies so that they can take a look at it and we can ensure it's something that they're going to be able to issue in the future. We hope to have internal review done by the end of December. I'm looking at the one gentleman that I'm waiting for right now to finish his review of it. Hi, Frank. And once that's done, hopefully early next year, we're going to try and get it out to the surety companies. In terms of everything else, it was simply minor changes for consistency with the ARCS rule and for what each of our financial mechanisms actually allow for.
Okay, we're going to do some really fun stuff now. For those of you on the webinar, this is our first test your knowledge question. True or false, surety bonds are in the new version of SARA, in SARA 2.0. True or false, A or B? In the room? Can I get any takers to put their hand up in the air? A. Thank you. B. I won't say anything else. I'm standing in the room with the course evaluation in my hand again. I know I said this in the beginning of the presentation. The pink course evaluations are for the folks in the room for the webinar. Please look at the course evaluations. When I said the email address for training, it's srwm_training@dep.nj.gov. Please send those to that email address. As for upcoming trainings, we had a suggestion recently to do training on data miner, which the department has already done. That prompted some discussion on whether that data miner presentation had enough information to you folks who use data miner. If anybody has looked at that presentation and sees that there is a deficit of information and would like additional training on data miner for the department and the training committee to do, we'd be happy to do it, and just send an email to that training email, and that would be really helpful.
Congratulations, you made it a full minute of wasting time, Christina. Everybody, round of applause for us.
Atwood, you're not
impressive.
the first person to say that.
All right, just to answer the question, absolutely true. We are bringing surety bonds back. In terms of what is financial assurance, so moving on, financial assurance is a guarantee to the state and public that funds are available to operate, maintain, and inspect engineering controls for a period that such engineering controls are going to be required. Our legislative and regulatory mandates, Chapter 19 of SARA established the permitting program. It also stipulates that a department may require a remediation funding source. May require financial assurance. I'm already doing it, folks. May require financial assurance. And then subchapter 5 and subchapter 7 of the ARCS rule, essentially we took that may and made it a must with our regulations. We're really good at doing that. When do you have to establish financial assurance? It's with your initial permit application. You have to have the financial mechanism in place. We'll talk about complete package submissions a little bit later. And then this just screenshot of our website. A reminder that we do have an RFS webpage. You can either type in the address or go to the link. It's under all other topics on the column on the left on our site remediation webpage. Homepage has a lot of good information from the RFS perspective. We do have a detailed remediation cost guidance document there. We also have our RFS exemption guidance document. And if you look at the important links box on the right, that'll give you the ability to also take a look at where we house our model language for our financial mechanisms like trust funds, lines of credit, letters of credit, et cetera.
Go ahead, take questions.
Do we have any questions? I say we move on. It's the overview. What question could you possibly have?
I couldn't agree with you more.
That's fantastic.
So let's move on. Okay. All right, our next presentation is on financial mechanisms and templates. Jen?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jennifer McLeod, and I've been here at the department for 12, going on 13 years now. I have been all of those years with site remediation, although I've been in 7, maybe 8 different units. The last 4 years I've been in remediation funding source. So we're going to go ahead and learn all about the financial mechanisms and the templates you can use. Which button do I push? Nope. Okay, everyone should have this table as a handout for today's presentation. This essentially summarizes all of the available mechanisms and when you can use them for either remediation funding source, a direct oversight remediation funding source, or financial assurance for your permit with an engineering control. You can see the first four: the remediation trust fund, line of credit, letter of credit, and environmental insurance policy can all be used across the board. But we really want you to keep in mind that the language and the versions of these model documents and the templates are different for RFS and FA. There's different citations, there's different beneficiaries, so same general mechanism, different languages. For a remediation funding source, there are two additional choices. You can do a self-guarantee or a loan or a grant. For financial assurance, you have the option of using a homeowners association budget. So I'm going to start going through the RFS mechanisms. The first two, the remediation trust fund and the line of credit, are our two liquid remediation funding sources. Essentially, you can use these two and use disbursements to pay for the remediation as you go. The second two, letters of credit or environmental insurance policies, are basically promises that monies will be paid to the DEP as the beneficiary if the responsible party fails to complete the remediation. Your fifth option, the self-guarantee, is a series of 3 financial tests with an application that proves that the entity has the financial means to complete the remediation, and no actual monies are posted. And your last choice is a loan or a grant from either the Hazardous Discharge Site Remediation Fund or the Petroleum Underground Storage Tank Remediation Upgrade and Closure Fund. I got it all in there, the US fund. So starting with the Remediation Trust Fund, it's probably the most familiar mechanism to all of you. This is if your client or the person conducting remediation has access to cash for the full amount of the cost to complete remediation. They're going to take that cash and put it into a trust account held by a trustee. Now, a trustee has to be an entity whose trust operations are regulated and overseen by either a New Jersey agency or a federal agency. What this boils down to essentially is either an attorney licensed to practice in the state of New Jersey or a bank. Even if your client or the person responsible for conducting remediation is an attorney, they can't act as their own trustee. What you're submitting to the department is the original remediation trust fund agreement, and the language in there stipulates that it cannot be revoked or terminated without written approval from the department. In order for a trustee to be relieved of his or her obligation, a successor trustee must be appointed first, or an alternate mechanism has to be provided. Again, it does allow for disbursements. Those are going to be directed by either the department or the LSRP. They have to be for actual remediation costs. You want to look at paragraph 4 if you have an existing trust fund to make sure that you have the option as the LSRP to direct those disbursements. If you have an old trust fund, contact the department. We can get those updated. Also, if you inherit a case with a trust fund, you want to look at Schedule D and update that to make sure you are the named LSRP authorized to direct disbursements. So moving on to lines of credit, this is the other choice that can do disbursements. You know, you can think of this just like a regular home equity line of credit. The responsible party is going to apply to a lending institution and get awarded access to a line of cash. There's usually an interest rate and a payback terms associated with that. Again, it has to be issued by an entity that is licensed to transact business in the state of New Jersey by the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance, or a federally regulated bank. The line of credit agreement that the issuer completes and fills out is going to state that it automatically renews each year. And again, it can't be terminated or revoked. It gets automatically extended. If they want to not renew it for the next year, they have to notify both the department and the applicant 120 days before the upcoming expiration date. Finally, the agreement is going to allow the department to access those funds in the case of failure to remediate. So to distinguish a line of credit from a letter of credit, no payments are made from a letter of credit. It's just a promise of money that will be paid to the department if they fail to remediate. Again, we have the requirement that it's issued by the entity licensed by the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance to transact business in the state of New Jersey or a federally regulated bank. It's going to be issued for a period of at least 1 year initially, and it's irrevocable. And then it has the auto renewal clause where it's extended for another year each year at each expiration date. Again, unless we get the non-renewal notification 120 days prior to the upcoming expiration date. When we get those, we do notify the person conducting remediation that they have to establish a new mechanism. But also, I would just have you inform your client if they receive one of these non-renewal notices, they should start working on their own to get a new mechanism in place. So environmental insurance policies are going to deviate from the 3 we've just been talking about. The first 3 all have model templates that you can use. Not the case for environmental insurance policies. It's similar to a letter of credit in that it's there in case there's a failure to remediate, and then the insurer is going to pay the department out the face value of the insurance policy. It also can't be revoked or terminated, except for in the only one case where there's a failure to pay the premium on the case of the person who gets the policy. In order to get environmental insurance policy, essentially what you have to do is submit a draft policy to the department. And we're going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, making sure that there's no limitations to access the funds on the part of the department. Particularly, there can't be clauses where the policy is null and void when there's acts of neglect or failure to act on the part of the covered party. Essentially, that's exactly when we would need the money from the policy. So that's not going to work. And usually what happens is after we make all our comments, most insurance companies kind of back off. But that being said, we do have 20 currently. 12 of those are the same 3 RPs from the same insurance company. So again, we take them. They're a little bit difficult to obtain, but it's worth the try. Finally, next we have the self-guarantee option. The main difference with self-guarantee, although there's a lot of differences, is that only the responsible party, the person responsible for posting the remediation funding source, can apply to self-guarantee. For the other 4 mechanisms we just went over, any third party who wants to can provide the RFS. If you have a rich uncle and he has nothing better to do than give you his money to clean up your site, perfectly acceptable. We'll take his money. But for a self-guarantee, it has to be the RFS responsible party. Atwood explained that that's the ISRA owner-operator at the time of the trigger, or it's going to be the party agreeing to conduct remediation as signed on the remediation certification. Otherwise, it's the person who executes the administrative consent order or was otherwise ordered to post RFS. The other main difference is that as an LSRP, you're not certifying the self-guarantee application. You're going to still come up with a cost estimate. You're still going to certify the remediation cost review form, but the self-guarantee application is certified by the chief financial officer. And the application is submitted annually to renew each year. So what actually gets submitted is the self-guarantee application itself, which is found on the SRP forms library page, and also your audited financial statements, which are either going to be the annual 10K report submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission for publicly traded companies, or just the fiscal year-end financial report for private companies. Included with that needs to be an independent auditor's report expressing an unqualified opinion. Unqualified in this case does not mean the auditor has no education or experience and they can't, express an opinion on that. It means that there's no caveats. They're confirming that the financial statements were prepared in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles of the United States or the International Financial Reporting Standards, and that there's no deviation, there's no caveats, there's no qualifiers to that opinion. We also have these special purpose entities, self-guarantees, where special purpose entity is created solely to purchase a contaminated property and redevelop it. And the sole asset is the contaminated property. And they don't generally have any other source of income, so they're not generating financial statements. Therefore, we can accept just a statement of assets and liabilities, but they still have to be certified by a CPA that they were prepared in accordance with GAAP. There are 3 financial tests. You have to pass all 3. We're getting into the nitty gritty of this, I know. Eyes are glazing over, I can tell. But essentially, the 1/3 tangible net worth has to be greater than the total cost to be established in your RFS. This information is normally found on the balance sheet, and you're taking your total net worth, subtracting out goodwill and intangible assets, coming up with your tangible net worth, and then dividing by 3. The next test is just a line item from the statement of cash flows. It literally says net cash provided by operating activities. That has to be greater than your 12-month estimate. And I point this out because normally you don't have to do the 12-month estimate, you're doing the total estimate, right? But if you're doing a self-guarantee, you also need to come up with the amount you're anticipating spending for the next 12 months. And finally, you have gross revenue minus gross payments has to be greater than the estimate for the next 12 months. This information can be found on the statement of income. And keep in mind that non-cash items like depletion, amortization, impairment, these can all be excluded from this calculation. This is just a screenshot from page 2 of the self-guarantee application itself. And I just wanted to point out, again, as an LSRP, you're going to be completing sections D and E for the cost estimate for 12 months, and the total amount that we're posting for RFS. And then section F, where all of those financial numbers I just went over with the test will go, is signed by the Chief Financial Officer. So if you're approved, you're going to get a renewal date based on the fiscal year end of the entity providing it. That's different than the other mechanisms where it's just a year after you submit. This is a little table of the most common fiscal year end dates. If you're denied, you're going to be asked to submit an alternate mechanism, a revised RCR form, and a 1% surcharge check, because you don't need 1% surcharge with a self-guarantee. If you do fail, then you're always eligible to try again the next year. Your last choice for remediation funding source, again, is a loan or grant from the HDSRF fund or the US fund. We do ask that these loans or grants be awarded by the department upfront. I would urge you to go to the brownfields and look over the eligibility requirements for HDSRF to see if you can apply. And also, as far as the US fund, I believe there's now like a 3.5-year wait, maybe longer, in order, for your application to even be reviewed. So it's an option. Okay, we're partway through. Those were your remediation funding source mechanism choices. Now, if your case is direct oversight and you need to post a remediation funding source, originally you could only use the direct oversight version of the trust fund agreement, and that made sure that only the department could direct disbursements. We had full control over the money. Now, with the SARA 2.0 changes, and in accordance with what compliance and enforcement has been doing with the 30, 60, 90-day rule, I don't know if anybody's familiar, we're allowing you to use the standard version of the trust fund or a line of credit, letter of credit, or environmental insurance policy for direct oversight sites. You cannot use a self-guarantee for direct oversight, and exemptions don't apply here. All right, so financial assurance mechanisms. Again, you can see the main 4 still available to use when you're submitting your financial assurance for an engineering control on a permit. Same basic mechanism, different language. Make sure you're picking the right template, whether you're doing RFS or FA. So I'm just going to skip to number 5 to everybody's relief, I'm sure. And it basically says, if you are the current property owner and you have the primary responsibility on your remediation permit, and you are either a residential homeowner association or condominium association defined by the New Jersey Common Interest Association Act, then you don't actually have to secure a separate financial assurance mechanism. You can provide documentation of your annual budget, which shows line items for the operation, maintenance, and inspection of your engineering control. The thought process behind that is that the HOA is going to have control over and access to the cap. In some very small instances, we do allow you to use your RFS as your FA. We highly recommend against this. It's always much clearer if you secure a separate financial assurance mechanism. But that being said, if you want to learn how to do that, you can revisit the June 2019 training as provided. So back to our table. Again, we've gone through, you can see all the various mechanisms and when they can be applied. I would also say that there is the option to use combinations. So you can use more than one to satisfy the total cost to complete remediation. This is a screenshot from our webpage. This is where you find the model documents if you're going to use them. Again, they're grouped according to funding source or FA. Please pick the appropriate one. And for direct oversight, you would now be using the regular remediation funding source templates. Once you open the template, you're not changing the language. You're filling in the blank. Just add your contact information, your site information. You're going to add your program interest numbers, your ISR case numbers. Keep in mind your SRPPI is different than your RFSPI. If it's a brand new RFS, you don't have an RFSPI yet. So just fill in the blank, please. The last document that we have is the annual evaluation and verification document. This gets submitted annually, every year, whether it's RFS or FA. FA, you're doing biennial certifications, but if you have a trust fund, line of credit, or environmental insurance policy, you're still submitting this form every year. It's actually filled out by the trustee or lender, and it tells us how much money is available in the mechanism, and that it confirms it will be in effect for the next 12 months. You find it here on our webpage. It's called RFS Annual Renewal Notification Template. It looks like this. And I would just ask you to change the attention line if you're submitting for FA. Instead of the RFS coordinator, send it to the financial assurance coordinator in the Bureau of Remedial Action Permitting. Okay, if anybody's awake and has any questions, I'll take them.
Okay, any questions in the room? Thank you, Jen. That
Thank
was
you.
awesome. You did great. Anyone in the room? Okay. You were so thorough, Jen. And any questions on the webinar? Okay, let's move on to our next presentation. RFS and FA exemptions. You have 15 minutes.
Hi again. So we're talking about the exemptions from the requirement to have to establish and maintain RFS or financial assurance. We're going to start off with the public service announcement, which is essentially any site that is subject to the provisions of direct oversight does not qualify for an RFS exemption. Reminder, our website, it is there. Our RFS exemption guidance is posted on our website at that link. But again, if you're subject to the provisions of direct oversight, no exemptions. Chapter 14 of ARCS is very specific in that sites that trigger direct oversight have to establish and maintain a funding source, okay? In terms of the exemptions, if you look at the column on the right, that's what we're going to be covering in detail. Again, we'll start RFS first, we'll cover FA later. I'll be going over the eligibility requirements as well as the application process for each one of these exemptions. Starting up first, The Environmental Opportunity Zone, or the EOZ exemption. The EOZ Act stipulates that a municipality may designate one or more qualified real properties as an environmental opportunity zone by passing a municipal ordinance. It's important to note that the municipal ordinance has to list the qualified real properties. It has to list their block and lots, okay? To be eligible for the exemption, the site or a portion of the site has to fall within the boundaries of that EOZ designation. It is possible for the EOZ to bifurcate your site. Some area of concerns be outside of the EOZ, therefore your exemption would only apply for the areas of concerns within the EOZ. Everything else you would still have to maintain remediation funding source for. Okay. In terms of the application process, we asked you to come in with the remediation cost review form. First page of the form, all the way at the bottom, has a series of check boxes where you can denote which exemption you're applying for. Beyond that, follow the instructions for the rest of the form. You do need to include the detailed remediation cost estimate. We ask that you give us the total cost to complete the remediation, give us the cost that's going to be exempt, and then if there's any area concerns left, give us the cost of RFS that remains in place, unless you're using the exemption for the entire site. For the EOZ exemption, we also require that you provide us a copy of the municipal ordinance, okay? Second up on the list, innovative remedial action technology. I strongly urge you to take a look at the definition of innovative remedial action technology under 1.3 of the ARCS rule. When I get to the application process of it, I'll touch on it and hopefully make it a little bit more clear to you as we go. In order to be eligible for this exemption, you have to be at the raw phase. That raw has to be submitted and it has to document the use of the innovative remedial action technology. Pretty obvious, makes sense, right? The exemption can only be applied to the portions of the site that are using the technology. If that technology does warrant you getting a discharge to groundwater permit by rule authorization request, you got to have that request into the department prior to applying for the exemption. In terms of the application process, similar to the EOZ, we need your remediation cost review form, your detailed cost estimate. Again, it's going to cover the entire estimated cost to complete the remediation. Give me the costs that are exempt. Give me the other costs that require any additional remediation funding source. And the second part, it's a lot of words up there, isn't it? Basically, what we're looking for is a detailed description of the innovative remedial action technology. All right. Give us a list. Let us know what it's covering. Is it area of concerns? Is it in the entire site? Give me a summary of the implementation process. What's the anticipated results? Are you targeting restricted use, unrestricted use, limited restricted use? And then more importantly, as the LSRP, give us the justification as you believe to why the remedial action technology is innovative based off upon whether, and this is similar with the definition in the ARCS rule, it's either a new or alternate method, procedure, or process that does not have a substantial operational record, or it has a substantial operational record. However, the technology is believed to be innovative because it's either being utilized for a new or different environmental problem, it's being applied or distributed in a unique manner, or it's being used in combination with other technologies that make it innovative. Now, the first part of that definition is true to the remedial action, to the innovative remedial action technology definition. In terms of guidance and what we've done with RFS, we've expanded the definition to also include it's being applied and distributed in a unique manner, or it's being used in combination, thus making it innovative. So we're giving you a little bit more freedom. If you're going for the technology exemption, you're gonna have to do some legwork as an LSRP. Number 3 up on the list, implementation of unrestricted or limited restricted use remedial action in a timely manner. So when I first started to write the guidance on this, I went to our legal folks and I said, can you define timely manner? And they looked at me and they said, no. So we had to rough it. This is what we came up with. This is what we ran through everybody. This is what we determined works for us. So in order to be eligible for this particular exemption, your RI has to be completed, submitted to the department. You have to have your raw completed, submitted to that the department. The raw has to document the use of unrestricted or limited restricted use remediation. Since the site must be in compliance with all applicable requirements and timeframes. This is the timely part, meaning you have to be in compliance with all your timeframes. That also includes regulatory timeframes. If the site has missed a regulatory timeframe, you're out. Since the exemption is being applied at the time of the raw submission, we stipulate that the remedial action has to be completed before the regulatory timeframe associated with remedial action. If you exceed that timeframe, you're disqualified from the use of this particular exemption, okay? Just like the other ones, the exemption can only be applied to the portions of the site involving the unrestricted or limited restricted use. Consistent with the other ones, we do need your remediation cost review form. We do need the detailed cost estimate, similar to EOZ and Innovative. Give us the breakdown of the cost. And then we need a summary of the proposed remedial action, including the dates in which the RI and the RAW were submitted. Folks, please don't send me a copy of your RAW. I don't want to see that. I'm literally looking for a summary. If we have questions, we have access electronically to the RI and the RAW. We can look up what we need to. I'm simply looking for a somewhat detailed summary, but don't give me your RAW, okay? In terms of the rest, these are the ones that are pretty much self-explanatory. If you're a government entity, the remediation is taking place at your home. It's a licensed daycare, private school, public school, charter school. It's all pretty much clear cut. That's all you have to do, all right? Come in with the form, come in with the cost estimate, provide proof that you are a licensed child care facility, et cetera, and it's pretty much straightforward. In terms of wrapping this up, we ask you to note that the department reviews all of our exemption requests on a case-by-case basis. This is our caveat. If I issue an innovative remedial action technology exemption today, and you apply for the same exemption 30 years from now, by saying case-by-case basis, I then have the right to deny it because it's been 30 years and now we have a substantial history of use of this particular remedial action technology. The department will provide written notification upon approval or denial. If you have any portion of the site that isn't covered by the exemption and you have to post RFS, you still have to adhere to our annual reporting requirements, meaning the annual cost review, detailed cost estimate, potential evaluation verification of the mechanism. We also note that if conditions change, you have to tell the department and you may have to reestablish RFS in accordance with subchapter 5. Meaning, I'm doing this really awesome in situ injection. It bombed beautifully. I now have to dig it out. You have to contact us, reestablish RFS for the cost of the rest of the remediation. From a financial assurance perspective exemption, again, first three are fairly obvious. If it's a school or if it's your resident, you're simply going to provide proof you qualify. From the FA perspective, I'm going to focus on the last two, owner and operator of small business and the Spill Act exemption. For the owner or operator of a small business, essentially small business means the entity does not acquire property for development or redevelopment within the prior 3 tax years. They do not employ more than 50 full-time employees. And they qualify as a small business concern within the Small Business Act, the federal act. I strongly urge you to take a look at the Small Business Act. Section 3 gives you the definitions and it lists a lot of stuff there. It'll say things like if you're engaged in food production or you raise livestock. It's quite an interesting read. I'm joking. The most common question that we get with this exemption is, I bought the property to move my business. I bought the property to expand my business. Do I still qualify for the exemption? From the department standpoint, what we're evaluating here is what is your core function as a business? If you're a developer and you buy sites to make residential properties, no, you don't qualify. But if you're the mom and pop, I don't know, tire store, and you're buying the property to expand your footprint, your main function as a business is not redevelopment. It isn't purchasing property. So yes, you still would qualify for this exemption. From the Spill Act exemption for FA exemption, this one's a little bit unique. It's the only one that's not listed in 5.2 of the ARCS rule. It's actually listed in subchapter 7 of the ARCS. Fact of the matter is I could probably give you a 15-minute presentation on this exemption alone. That's how involved it could potentially be. We don't really have the time for that, but really just know what we're talking about is spill act liability. It is a 3-part exemption process, okay? There's 3 parts to this exemption, all right? The person is not otherwise liable under the Spill Act, Part 1. You purchased the site prior to May 7, 2009, Part 2, and they're remediating or have remediated the contaminated site pursuant to 5810-2311 GD, okay? Folks, this is really difficult to get this exemption, okay? If you look at that citation 5810-2311 GD, there's a whole laundry list of requirements there. And it's very easy to disqualify yourself for it. If you're an ISRA case, you're out. If the discharge occurred after they own the property, you're out. This is incredibly hard to get. Most of the time I get, well, I bought the property before May 7th. I'm good, right? No, okay? From the FA exemption application process, we simply need you to provide the initial remedial action permit, whether it be for groundwater or soil. Section I, you're going to check off the exemption you're qualifying for or applying for. And then in Section K, all other information, that's where you're going to list your justification, rationale, professional judgment, whatever, for the proof of the exemption. Okay, this is where you get to plead your case. Any questions? Hey, Karen.
Hey, Atwood, how often does the innovative technology one get applied for? And can you tell us some of the things that have qualified for innovative technology?
We don't really keep track of the list. We are aware a lot of them are bio injection related. I don't know, in terms of percentages, it's not fairly frequent. I will tell you, if you apply for that exemption and you're going for it and you present your argument, we are going to refer it to either Bureau or pollution abatement, depending upon whether it's soil or groundwater. I know they have a lot of reference material, like the include site that they look at. But we're trying not to bias it in terms of what we're giving the exemptions to and what we're not from the innovative aspect.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, we have one question on the webinar. It's from Rob Edgar. Can
Rob.
a new owner, new PRCR in parenthetical, access RFS established by prior PRCR, assuming original PRCR defaults? And if so, what is that process?
Okay, so I think what he's talking about, if we draw upon remediation funding source, we take somebody else's money, how do we make it available to other people? I don't know if this is the appropriate section to discuss this, but I also don't know that we're covering that in detail at any point in this presentation. Basically, we do have a petition process that involves filling out a shell letter. If you're trying to access somebody else's funds that we took, you complete the blanks in the letter, send it to us. That authorizes Jen and myself and some of my other staff who do this to do a background check on the entity, because we're going to ensure that you're in no way, shape, or form affiliated with the folks that we took the monies from. If you meet that requirement, we'll allow you access to the funds as the money's last spent on the site. Meaning if we take 100,000, once your estimated cost is 100,000 or less, that's when we allow you to start drawing down over the money that we took. If you find yourself in a position where you want access to somebody else's monies that we took, call me. We'll talk you through it.
Is that like, is there guidance on that?
We have guidance that we hand out when people are interested.
Thank you. Okay, one more question from the webinar. Can you go into detail on the advantages of having an economic opportunity zone? And I believe that this person works for the department.
Yes, he does. It is an environmental opportunity zone. Basically, there's really no significant advantage outside of the town letting you off the hook of having to post remediation funding source. The statute used to stipulate that the town would have to grant a property tax exemption on a decreasing trend over the course of, I believe it was 10 to 15 years. In January 2017, the law was amended to remove the tax exemption requirement for the town. So now essentially a town can grant an EOZ exemption without any risk of losing their tax writables. But the significant advantage to the EOZ is not having to post RFS.
Okay. All right. One more question. Can Spill Act exception for FA be applied, I'm going to say, to historic fill related FA costs for caps? And that's Rich Calgero.
Again, it's going to come down to Spill Act liability. If we're calling it, if you are liable under the Spill Act, you are liable to post financial assurance. It wouldn't really matter.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Atwood. All right. Our next presentation is on developing a detailed cost estimate. Joe?
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Purse. I'm an LSRP with GEI Consultants, and today I'll be covering developing detailed cost estimates for remediation funding source and financial assurance. All right. So why do we prepare RFS and FA? Basically to keep our clients in compliance with New Jersey statutes and regulation, ensure that there are sufficient funds to complete the remediation, basically to protect the taxpayers of the state of New Jersey. Certify that the PRCR has established sufficient funds to complete the remediation. But there's also an ethical component. LSRP's highest duty is to the protection of human health and the environment. If there are not sufficient funds to complete remediation, sites can go unremediated and receptors can be impacted. The regulatory citation for RFS is found in the ARCS rule. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but if you go through it, it basically says everything. Make sure you include everything in RFS. Does anyone want to guess why I highlighted a portion of the text in red? Correct, yeah. It basically, many of us think of RFS and FA as separate, but they're really not. If you believe your final remedy is going to have an engineering control, the calculation of financial assurance is a component of your cost estimate for remediation funding source. So they're not actually separate. The last four bullets under 5.3 are essentially, you shall post this amount. So there's actually no calculation of a cost estimate under those scenarios. Okay, there's an REO out there somewhere. How are you going to find it? Which pathway are you going to take? One of the implicit requirements for preparing a cost estimate is that you actually develop a pathway, a closure pathway for your site. You have to sit down from your point that you're at now and decide the steps you're going to take to achieve an REO for your site. And you need to communicate those steps to your client in the PRCR. Now, obviously, your closure pathway will change as you develop new information and go through the case, but that's okay because the DEP requires you to look at it every year. So every year you're reviewing your closure pathway, and as a consequence, you're updating your cost estimate. Now, you can think of RFS as an umbrella. Everything is underneath it. There's almost nothing that's really excluded from your cost estimate for RFS. Now, I'm not going to go through all the bullets, but I want to highlight legal assistance. If you think counsel is a part of your remediation, for example, access agreements, or perhaps even litigation to gain access to a site, that also falls under RFS. And also I highlighted engineering controls. You're going to hear this a lot. Financial assurance is calculated while you're calculating your remediation funding source. It's not something you do at the end when you're posting a remediation permit. All right. There are essentially two types of cost estimates that the DEP sees. There's the non-detailed cost estimate and the detailed cost estimate. Non-detailed, we're going to do some soil and groundwater sampling. We're going to do some reporting. We'll do some more sampling, some sort of undefined remediation, and then we get an REO. And here's an RFS cost estimate. Avoid that. You want a detailed cost estimate that conveys a type of closure plan you're going for. 10 soil borings, 6 groundwater monitoring wells. I'm going to assume that there's no soil gas or indoor air. I'm going to submit my appropriate reports. I might do some soil excavation. I'm going to estimate 100 tons, 8 quarterly runs of groundwater sampling, etc. This gives the DEP the confidence that you developed an appropriate cost estimate. Calculating RFS. In the RFS FA form section E, I believe, the link is above to the form, the DEP asks how you calculated your cost estimate. Racer, cost, pro, surrogate amounts, we're gonna go through them all. But the last one is calculated independently by the LSRP or consultants. Competitive bids, internal company data. I tend to default to professional knowledge and experience. I've been in the business for 20 years. I have a general idea of how much environmental actions cost. So RACER is the remedial action cost engineering and requirements. It was basically developed specifically for environmental investigations and was developed by the Air Force as part of their budgeting process. So if you're doing a Department of Defense project, perhaps you've used RACER. Cost Pro is a more generic cost estimating tool. It's developed by the Air Force. I've been informed that this might not exist anymore, but it still remains on the form. Surrogate amounts. If you're preparing an ISRA remediation certification, the link's on the slide. If the PASI is completed, you don't get to use surrogate amounts. You're going to prepare a specific, a site-specific cost estimate. If the PASI is not completed, you can use surrogate amounts, but the LSRP may still prepare a cost-specific RFS amount if they believe that they have sufficient knowledge to generate such a cost estimate. Now, if you do use the surrogate amount, the minimum is $100,000 if you don't have any information on contamination and $250,000 if groundwater impact is known. Now, does anyone see a gap in those two choices? What if you know that there's soil contamination, but you don't know if there's any groundwater contamination? Which one do you use? Well, LSRP can use their professional judgment, or they can reach out to the DEP and talk it through with them. Regardless, after the PASI is submitted, you got 30 days to prepare a site-specific cost estimate amount.
Okay, we're gonna test your knowledge again for the webinar participants. The question is, what is the surrogate amount when a PASI is not completed? We're gonna open up the question period. Is it A, minimum of 100,000 when no contamination information is known? B, minimum of 250,000 when groundwater impact is known? C, $1 million? Or D, A or B, depending on what is known about the site? Anyone in the room want to answer? A, show of hands. Y'all are asleep. B, C, or D? Let's see, how many seconds do I have to burn? This morning, a lot of people that are in the room were at the SHRAG. Janine McGregor mentioned that the application for the LSRP exam is due to the department by December 30th. So for any aspiring LSRPs who are on the webinar, little public service announcement, the test is on April 20th, I believe. 22nd, thank you, Ira. So get your applications in and we are done. Thank you, Joe. The answer is D.
A or B?
The room was correct by a mile. Hope you were on the webinar.
All right, the DEP provides lots of tools and guidance. There's a couple of web pages on the slide. Within these web pages are the frequently asked questions, as well as a checklist, which you can download in a PDF format or as an Excel spreadsheet. We're going to go through an overview of the checklist. Basically, the checklist drives you to include all remediation for all AOCs through the issuance of the RAO, including all media, soil, groundwater, sediment, ecological, and air. O&M must be incorporated until financial assurance has been established. So once again, financial assurance is a component of your remediation funding source. Obviously, not all components of the checklist will be applicable to your site. However, the checklist is not exclusive. It does not limit you. You don't only have to account for what's on the checklist. If there are additional items that are part of your remediation that are not included on the checklist, they are still part of your RFS. So the next two slides are my attempt to condense the checklist as much as possible. I'm not going to go through these all, but the components are general and miscellaneous, project management, public notification, NJDEP fees. This is actually interesting because it's one of the few items of relief that the DEP gives to you. You only have to post 1 year of DEP fees. Your year one RFS only has to have DEP fees. Subsequent years do not have to have DEP fees provided as part of the RFS. All components, reports, and all components of the reports, quality assurance project plans, data of known quality evaluation, waste disposal, modeling. If it's in your report or a part of your investigation, it's part of your RFS. Remediation for all media, construction, backfill, system installation, land purchase. Some of our remediations actually do involve buying land. If it does, it's part of your RFS. IECs and VCs, if you have them, you're into a different set of regulations, and then those are now a part of your remediation funding source cost estimate. Same for LNAPL and direct oversight. Once again, post REO engineering controls. That's financial assurance again, part of your RFS. Soil, cap repair, fence maintenance, groundwater treatment systems, vapor mitigation systems. These are all going to be included. All right. I'm a geologist by training. I'm not an engineer, not a chemist, not an accountant. What do you do? Because we have to incorporate many of these skill sets into developing our cost estimates. So some say an LSRP never takes off their hat. I say which hat? LSRPs can't know everything. So what do? Consult with knowledgeable parties. Let's just say that you're going to be doing excavation next to a building. Contact some engineers, some contractors. What kind of engineering supports might I need? Let's say you need helical piers. Well, how many piers? How deep will they go? How long will it take to install these engineering supports? And with that information, you can start to build a reasonable cost estimate for your RFS. Discount factors. Everybody loves them. Everyone wants to use them. In the DEP's RFS frequently asked questions, they acknowledge that RFS and FA costs project into costs into the future. You can use a discount factor or a present value as long as all assumptions are disclosed and a justification and explanation is applied when using the cost discount factor. It is on a case-by-case basis. Just because you use a present value or discount factor at one site does not mean it'll be accepted at another site. You have to justify it on a case-by-case basis. This is one that I use frequently. It's the White House Office of Management and Budget Circular A94, Appendix C. The link that is shown is for what the current OMB circular discount number is. These tend to get updated every year. It should be getting updated either this month or shortly into the new year. February. If you just type in OMB circular A94 Appendix C in Google, you'll come right to the appropriate page. The OMB circular includes the real interest rate, which takes into account inflation, and the nominal interest rate, which does not take into account inflation. The OMB circular covers multiple year durations, 5, 7, 10, 20, and 30, I believe. The current 30-year rates are 1.5% for the real interest rate and 3.6% for the nominal interest rate. These change every year. So if you use this source, they'll change, which will have a material effect on your cost estimate. There's also the NJDEP technical guidance on the capping of sites undergoing remediation, Appendix C. This is referenced for financial assurance and includes an example calculation sheet. It also references a 3% discount factor. It does not say use a 3% discount factor. It doesn't say to not use it. It just has it's hanging out there. Now, as LSRPs, we love to be able to reference something, so I want to draw your attention that this reference actually exists. You can also use other sources, but you have to provide justification for using them. All right, the EPA in 2000 put out the Guide to Developing and Documenting Cost Estimates During a Feasibility Study. It references a discount rate of 7% Curiously, the capping guidance also references the EPA 7% discount factor. The DEP guidance doesn't say to use it, doesn't say to not use it, just references it. But we're here to tell you today that this reference is 19 years old and is no longer accepted by the DEP. So do not use this discount factor. So what discount factors are the current DEP currently using? Basically, if you're in the 0 to 3% range, you're probably going to be fine, as long as you provide justification. The maximum discount factor the DEP is currently accepting is 3.6%. That happens to be the 30-year nominal interest rate from the OMB circular. Once again, what's considered reasonable for discount factors will change over time. Assumptions. You have to include assumptions in your cost estimates. You have to define how you developed your cost estimate. So anticipated dates of milestone activities, the number of years of the environmental case. If it's over 30 years and non-determinate, if it's non-determinate, you use 30 years. Anticipated date of the REO. Are you going to be issuing an unrestricted, limited restricted, or unrestricted use REO? Once again, if you believe you're submitting a restricted use REO, your financial assurance is a component of your RFS. Number of years of a CEA, the magnitude and type of the RI, what AOCs are you investigating, what media are you investigating, maybe put in an estimate of the number of soil borings and monitoring wells, presence of LNAPL, VCs, or IECs. You're gonna have to do vapor sampling, vapor mitigation, provide alternate water supplies. What final remedy do you anticipate using? Soil excavation, how many tons are you gonna dig out? Injection, where are you gonna inject and how deep? Engineering controls or a system, what are they gonna include? What discount factor will you use, et cetera. Lastly, you might wanna put in a statement of how accurate you think your RFS is. Your first year of RFS should be reasonably accurate. Doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but it needs to be reasonably accurate. But a statement along the lines of that your RFS estimate is getting less accurate the further out you project might be a good idea to include. And lastly, are your assumptions supportable? They can't be unreasonable assumptions. All right, so there is no right answer for RFS. You take two LSRPs, give them the same amount of information, tell them to develop RFS cost estimates. They're not going to come up with the same number, but it just needs to be credible, needs to be reasonable, believable. So let's just talk through a quick example. There's a gas station with an automobile repair shop. There is a 10,000 gallon gasoline UST. There is one groundwater sample from a temporary well point with benzene at 19 ppb. Which RFS amount is credible? So got a groundwater sample from an unconfined overburden aquifer, and we have benzene just below the groundwater screening level for a vapor intrusion investigation. So show of hands, who thinks 5,000 would be a reasonable cost estimate amount?
Nobody in the room has their hand up for people on the webinar, by the way.
Yeah, you can't get much done for $5,000. How about $25,000?
That would be the same, no hands.
You might get some investigation done for that. $150,000?
There's some hands up.
I'd say the majority of the room put their hands up. I'll ask $1 million. Who wants to put their hand up for $1 million? I would go with $150,000 without really knowing anything else. If I saw $1 million, I would think that was excessive, unless, or maybe that I'd had incomplete information as to how they generated $1 million. Let's change the parameters a little bit. It's no longer benzene, but it's TCE. It's no longer from overburden, but it's in a bedrock aquifer. And immediately down gradient are residential properties on potable water supplies. Who here thinks $150,000 is reasonable now?
Nobody has their hand up.
How about $1 million? Some people are like, maybe even more. But of the four, who here thinks that $1 million is the most reasonable? Okay. So what a credible RFS amount can change pretty quickly just by tweaking a couple of the facts of the environmental case. Discussing RFS can be very difficult and can be a contentious conversation. So there are common pitfalls. The client's goals and the LSRP requirements may vary. Client says, I don't want to post any money. Hopefully you can convince them of their obligations. If you can't, perhaps you're not going to be their LSRP for much longer. Does the RFS amount have to be that high? Maybe not. Maybe you can look at it again, as long as you're keeping it a credible amount. RFS or cost estimates versus a proposal to the client. You hand your client a cost estimate for RFS and the client thinks that it's a proposal, that you're guaranteeing that you're going to close their site for that amount of money. You have to make sure you're talking to your client so that they understand what the purpose of RFS is and that it is not a cost estimate by you to complete the remediation at the site. RFS cost estimate versus internal company data, internal company cost reserves and insurance reserves, can they be different? Can you submit an RFS to the New Jersey DEP but have internal company reserves for the environmental remediation be different? As long as you can justify it, if you have a justifiable reason for having that difference. And lastly, the PRCR and the person establishing and maintaining RFS FA are different. What if those parties come into conflict? How do you handle that? Once again, I think if you're preparing a reasonable cost estimate, you're probably protected from most issues. But these are things we have to deal with. And I think that is it.
Okay, any questions in the room?
Right there.
Not a question, but maybe a point of clarification. I think in the cost estimate guidance document that DEP has, they talk about sort of forecasting post-closure. And one of the things that is not specifically in there is for remedial action permitting costs for M&A. It's not an engineering cost. And so I think per the rules, those costs are not included in RFS. So I just want to clarify that that still is the case.
It absolutely still is the case. You're spot on.
Thank you, everybody.
We're going to
Or you're
cover
welcome.
that with frequently asked questions later, but it basically boils down to monitor natural attenuation does not have an engineering control, so there's no operation, maintenance, or inspection costs associated with it. Thank you, Mark.
Any other questions in the room?
How do you deal with the durations for the indeterminate elements like TCE and bedrock and, you know, or institutional controls? We have a cap on a site that has to be inspected for forever until, yeah.
Well, if it's indeterminate, you calculate for 30 years. And if it's a permanent engineering control, like for historic fill or metals, that's not going to degrade over time, that 30-year duration never drops. It's perpetually 30 years.
Hey, Dave Prusaka. I had a question about, I think the last slide, you had a comment on, you know, possibly having the, like, if you're, let's just say you're an industry person, you have an accrual set. There it is, the third one down. Internal company cost, you know, reserves versus the RFS. In what situation would they be different? How could you justify that?
I'll just give you, once again, I'm not the final word, obviously the DEP is, but I'll give you an example that I thought about just in case this question came up. You develop your RFS cost estimate, you follow the DEP, you have a large amount of fidelity of the DEP rules, you apply a discount factor. It's all legit, you've covered everything, all the steps of your environmental remediation. You hand it to the PRCR or your client, and the client goes, this is great, perfect, send it in. But for internal costing reserves at the company, our internal rules don't allow us to apply a discount factor. So run the cost estimate again, removing the discount factor, and that's what I'm going to use for internal purposes. You know, now, I don't know if that's ever been tested anywhere, but it seems reasonable.
Do you have anything to add, Atwood?
No,
Jen?
I mean, from our perspective, we're looking at it to ensure that all remediation costs for every CAOC is represented through the completion of the site. In addition to department fees, as well as operation, maintenance, and inspection of an engineering control. If a company wants to represent those costs on the books as slightly higher, again, we're only going to go by what's on the detailed cost estimate. And if it meets our requirements, we're satisfied.
Yeah, I'll add a couple others. I mean, the exemptions, for example, if you received an exemption from the department, the RFS number is lower for the unrestricted remediation or innovative use, whereas the company may maintain accruals for that higher value, right? They're going to spend that money. They just don't need to put it in RFS. Company policies may be reasonably estimable and probable, which are different perhaps than what the department's looking for. So there are a number of criteria that could be used to establish numbers for internal purposes that are different from the RFS values.
Thanks, Neil. Go ahead, Karen.
I'm always interested in the practical application. How many cost proposals do you generally see that don't pass the red face test? My sense is that I don't see many rejections and I don't hear many rejections. Are they generally passing the red face test?
I mean, if you're talking about, does it pass the sniff test, the laugh test? I'd say a handful every year. You know, if you get that site that wants to cap 100 acres and they quote $50 or $5,000 for asphalt, yeah, we're going to call you on it. Turns out that that site is actually an asphalt facility. Yeah, maybe it makes sense. Unfortunately, that's real life. But with that being said, I mean, we're looking to ensure that all aspects of the remediation are being incorporated in your detailed cost estimate. You may have to install monitoring wells. I don't know if you got 6 bids and you took the lowest bid and he happens to be your uncle. We're not really going to question you on that, as long as you're representing the groundwater remedial investigation. So from a lab perspective, a handful a year.
Okay. Any other questions?
I got a question that just goes backwards to one of the earlier sessions that I thought of as we were talking about this stuff. So there's an exemption for like homeowners associations and condominium associations relative to financial assurance, as long as their financial statement includes, you know, the normal upkeep that would be required to maintain a cap. So the question I have is, there certain industries, for example, railroads, that as part of their O&M have to maintain their rights of way. And I guess I'm just curious as to whether in a condition where maybe contamination from an offsite property went under a railroad right of way, which creates a whole difficult situation to begin with, but the fact that the railroad has an operation and maintenance budget to maintain its right of way, would that be a situation where actually an exemption from financial assurance would apply, like would be applied for, you know, homeowners or condominium association?
In terms of what we allow for the ARCS rule, we simply are referencing homeowners condo association. We don't have any caveat or any exemption built in for that particular situation that you described involving the right of way for a railroad.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Great job. We are going to take a 10-minute break. Okay, I'm sorry, I've been corrected. We are taking a 7-minute break. I'm going to make it. Okay, everybody, I'm going to come back from break. It's 3 o'clock. I'd like to get started for the second part of the presentation. Atwood's going to talk again about complete RFS and FA packages. Atwood?
Is everybody back? Hustle up. If everybody wants to turn around and look at the people in the room standing up, feel free. How about out front? No, I'm just kidding. So we're talking about complete RFS and FA packages. Just know that up front, we wanted to give this section to Joe Purse to do, but then it dawned on us we're talking about the complete package. So who better to talk about the complete package than Jennifer McLeod, but she didn't want to talk about this subject, so I got stuck with it. So we're going to focus, just like we have been all day, RFS first, FA second. We'll talk about the ISRA initial submission packages, what makes it complete. We'll talk about adjusted direct oversight. We'll talk about annual reporting requirements, and then we'll go into the FA aspect of it. So before I talk about that, I have to talk about this, remediation certification. So the original intent of ECRA and ISRA was that a site was going to complete the remedial investigation, have a remedial action plan in place prior to the industrial establishment transaction occurring. Yeah, that's not realistic. Things like sales of business, sale of property, stock transfers, they all have to occur to keep the economy growing, to keep the economy moving. So the department offered relief to this. And in the past, it was the ECRA ACOs, then it became the remediation agreements. Now today, it's the remediation certification. This is the vehicle that allows the industrial establishment, that allows the ISRA transaction to occur real time. What is it exactly? Well, it's a form. I know, everybody's excited. Another form, yeah. On the form, we're gonna have site location, is there subject owner or operators, is there subject transaction that are occurring, and more importantly, the party or parties who are agreeing to be the person responsible for conducting the remediation. We affectionately just refer to it as Section G. Who's stepping up to the plate? In terms of who can be responsible, really it could be the owner, the operator, buyer, developer, parent company. The point is it's not limited to the ISRA triggering party. It's not limited to the seller, okay? The purchaser can step up and say, I want to be the person responsible. And it happens quite a bit. She's looking at me funny, but it is the truth. But the ISRA subject owner operator is never truly released from their ISRA liability. Just because the purchaser stepped up and established the pecking order with us and said, I'm going to go first. I'm first in line. I'm ISRA liable. Well, if they fall out of favor, don't do what they're going to do, we're going to return to the seller. You never truly lose your ISRA liability. ISRA really is the gift that keeps on giving. So if your ISRA transaction has to occur real time, in terms of the department, what do we consider a complete package? What do we have to have in our hands? Well, we need the remediation certification. We need the remediation cost review RFS FA form filled out for the initial. If you're doing a site-specific detailed cost estimate, I need you to attach that. If not, I need you to check off the surrogate box that applies. I need your original RFS mechanism, and then I need a 1% surcharge tech, unless you're using a self-guarantee. This has to be in our hands prior to the transaction closing. We do not issue approvals. You will not hear from us. I simply have to have it before you close. If there are any issues or deficiencies discovered, we'll deal with that after the fact and we'll get the necessary corrections we need. If you happen to be the ISRA site that is going to wait until the raw phase before your transaction occurs, within 14 days of the LSRP submitting the certified raw, you have to establish RFS. I need your remediation cost review form. I need your detailed cost estimate. Under these circumstances, you're at the raw phase, you no longer qualify for a surrogate amount, okay? You're past the PASI, so it's got to be a detailed, site-specific detailed cost estimate. I'm going to need your original RFS mechanism, and I'm going to need your 1% surcharge check, unless it's self-guarantee. The reality is, I'd say 99% of the cases that wait until they hit the raw phase is a standalone cessation. It's really the only case that can wait for the most part, then situation that you can wait. But if it happens to be a cessation and sale of property, well, prior to the sale of property occurring, I have to have RFS established and I need you to file your remediation certification.
Okay, for the webinar, folks, when can a party close an ISR transaction with a remediation certification? A party can close an ISR transaction before submission of a complete RC package. B, a party can close an ISR transaction after submission of a complete RC package. C, never. D, once the party discusses with the ISR party plan. I'm so sorry.
I didn't write these questions. I take no responsibility for that. Nobody put my name on that train wreck. I mean, it's well done.
I was really having a hard day when I had to.
Is
make
this
that
what a hard day
question
looks
up.
like on
This is
paper?
what- It is. Your days are so much harder than mine, I'm so sure. Really quick, BIR has been working with the LSRPA on developing updated versions of the RAO guidance and better instructions to the SID. So that will be stuff that we hope to be training on in 2020. I just wanted to get that in there. Are we done? No.
48 seconds.
Nuh-uh.
Is it?
No.
Okay. Hey, look, I'm at a weird angle.
So the answer is, it is not D, by the way.
Come on.
Come on.
Yeah, I'm trying. The clicker doesn't like me. It is B. A party can close the ISR transaction after the submission of a complete remediation certification package. So moving on, as I was so rudely interrupted. I'm just kidding. Talking about complete RFS packages for sites that trigger the provisions of our direct oversight and are seeking an adjustment. We're really talking about any site that missed a statutory, mandatory, or expedited time frame. The site is in direct oversight the moment you miss the time frame, regardless of whether or not you hear from the department. The benefit to adjusted direct oversight is essentially you get to keep your LSRP. You don't have a case manager overseeing you. You're entitled to a reduced penalty. It's good perks. You will have to sign an administrative consent order. In order for the remediation funding source package to be complete under adjusted direct oversight, within 90 days, we're going to need to see the public participation plan, the initial remediation cost review, RFS FA form. The checkbox on this one on the form stipulates, here's my direct oversight remediation trust fund. That's no longer a requirement. You can use any one of our mechanisms with the exception of a self-guarantee. Just know that with SARA 2.0, we have a whole lot of updating to do, and we're certainly going to target that. We're also going to need your detailed cost estimate. Those costs must include the direct oversight specific costs like feasibility study, cost to execute your public participation plan, department oversight fees, etc. We're going to need your original RFS mechanism, no self-guarantees for direct oversight, and we need 1% surcharge check, okay? We have guidance available for adjusted direct oversight. It's at this link. If your site's subject to the provisions of direct oversight, please go to this link. Gives you all the information you need. It'll talk you through the process, and also it will give you the phone number so that you can call the department's compliance assistance duty officer. We strongly urge you to call the duty officer. We'll get somebody assigned. We'll hold your hand through the process. It's a lot of help. From an annual reporting requirement, each year, if you have a requirement to establish and maintain RFS, each year you have to come in with an updated annual cost review, basically 365 days after you originally established. That is our remediation cost review form. Section C of the form, it's going to be annual cost review in accordance with 5.10. With it, you're going to give us the detailed cost estimate. That cost estimate is going to be an updated estimate so that you're supporting the amount of RFS that's currently being maintained. You're also going to give us the information on the money spent to date. And just know that you will have an obligation to pay the 1% surcharge fee for that year, but you don't have to send a check in with your annual cost estimate or cost review. The department will issue a separate invoice to the PRCR to be paid, okay? If you are maintaining a line of credit, remediation trust fund, or environmental insurance policy, as Jen covered earlier, you do owe us an annual valuation verification. It's a simple statement. Here's the current value of my RFS. I guarantee it for the next 12-month period. We do have our model document available online. In terms of what constitutes a complete package for initial financial assurance, that's basically the remedial action permit, the initial application, whether it be for groundwater or soil. We need your remediation cost review and RFS FA form with a detailed cost estimate supporting the estimated cost to complete operation, maintenance, and inspection. We need your original financial assurance mechanism, and please note, there is no 1% surcharge on the financial assurance. Biannually, and I got to focus that I don't say biannually. This is, we'll just say every 2 years. I have issues. Every 2 years, you owe us the 2-year remediation cost review form. With it, you're going to give us the detailed cost estimate. This is going to reaffirm the amount of financial assurance that's being established and maintained. If you are maintaining a line of credit, a remediation trust fund, an environmental insurance policy, even though it's financial assurance, you still annually owe us the valuation verification. That statement, here's the current value. I guarantee it for the next 12-month period. Our model is available online. That's it. Any questions?
All right. Doesn't look like there's any questions in the room on the webinar. I believe you are done then. Thank
Awesome.
you, Atwood. Okay, our next presentation is Jen, and she's going to talk about adjusting RFS and FA.
Hello, everyone again. So now you have your remediation funding source or your financial assurance established, and it needs to change. So we're just going to go through how to document that to the department. Before I start, I just want to clarify these 3 terms: reduce, disperse, release. They're not the same. They are very different. You reduce your RFS or FA when your new cost estimate reveals your RFS and FA established is overfunded and it requires DEP written approval. You disperse from your RFS for all practical purposes when you have a trust fund or a line of credit, and it's to pay for remediation costs incurred or to be incurred. We release the RFS or FA when you've issued an REO or we've terminated the RAP, or in the case that I'm going to discuss, when you provide an alternate mechanism. So just disperse, reduce, release. Any and all these changes are documented on the remediation cost review form, just like everything else. Again, every year, annually for RFS or biennially for FA, you're telling us the money you've spent to date, what your new estimate is, and you're describing those changes from the previous estimate. You're also going to typically be document changes in amounts, reductions, increases, disbursements, and changes in mechanism type. So I do just want to point out that going from a letter of credit from one bank to a letter of credit from another bank, still a change in mechanism. It's a different mechanism, it's a new one, it's a replacement. Please still fill out this form. All right, so we'll start with change in amount and reductions and increase first. And just as a reminder, RFS must be equal to or greater than the cost estimate. FA has to be equal to or greater than the cost to operate, maintain, and inspect engineering controls. For this reason, we say you may reduce when it comes up. You don't have to. We gladly keep all the money you want to give us. You do not have to reduce at any point in time. However, oppositely, it must be increased when it's determined. That's going to be determined again during the annual or biennial review, or just at any point in time when you find out there's an increase. Maybe you've got sample results now and your contamination extent is larger than you thought. Maybe you've discovered an IEC on your site. So if you know that the cost now is increased, you should come in with the RCR form and document that increase. The other time is if we review your estimate and determine you're missing something, we'll ask you to revise and resubmit, increase your RFS and FA, and we'll give you 30 days to do that. Oops. So again, the reduction is approved by the department. So you submit your RCR form, we review. If we agree, we will issue the letter to the lending institution or the trustee authorizing the reduction. If you want to move forward with an increase, you should just contact your lending institution directly. Just go ahead, start that process. Don't wait for the DEP to approve. Just changing the amount for financial assurance doesn't require a soil or groundwater permit modification application. So same for same. All right. So how do you document all of this to the department? This is taken directly from the instructions on the RCR form. It tells you you need to do sections A, B, C, D, E, I, J, and K. You do have the RCR form, I think, available to you if you want to follow along. If you don't, I'm sure you've looked at it 100 times by now. I'm going to skip sections A and B because that's your site information, your contact information. Also, I, J, and K are your signatures and certifications. So we'll ignore those for now. Skipping right to section C, you have a change in amount. So you're going to check the box that says change in remediation funding source or financial assurance amount pursuant to subchapter 511. Again, I'm going to treat all of these as if they're standalone, but if you were doing this with your annual or biannual, you're going to also check the appropriate boxes for those. Check all that apply. Section D, you're going to tell us, are you submitting this form and this change in amount for an RFS or an FA? I've chosen financial assurance. Then you tell us what's the mechanism we're currently holding. I have line of credit. Item 1 tells us the expiration date of the financial assurance mechanism. So looks like this one's about to expire soon. I'm not worried though, because it's a line of credit. They auto renew. Plus, we probably got an annual evaluation and verification telling us it's going to be good for the next year. On item 2, this amount is the amount we're currently holding before you give us this form. It's the amount from last year's form and result, or your last disbursement form. What was the last number the department is aware of? That's the number that goes on item number 2. Then it says, do you want to disperse, reduce, or increase? Yes, we do. We're going to increase by $12,000. I know the boxes all say RFS, but also check them for FA. Thanks. When you're done filling out section D and you add items 2 and 3 together, that should be your new FA estimate amount, $60,000. And we're going to check that in the next section, section E. So here's where you tell us how you came up with this number. Actual competitive bids is what I've chosen. If it's RFS, you're going to write the amount on the first line under item 2. This is financial assurance, so it goes on the second line. Finally, you tell us who prepared your cost estimate. Anybody here, Ima? Anybody know? What happens from here is your permittee will reach out to their institution and say, hey, I need an increase to $60,000 on my line of credit. And the department will wait for verification of that, and then your increase is approved. If it's a reduction, again, we'll issue the letter and wait for verification from your trustee or banking institution. Letters of credit, we get amendments. For trust accounts, we usually get bank statements or an extra valuation. Otherwise, you just submit it and you're done. Oh, okay. You want to wait till the end? Everyone's saying wait till the end. Okay, thank you. All right, so disbursements, again, I'm saying they're related to RFS only. Can you technically disperse from an FA trust fund or a line of credit? Yes, you can. And then we'll immediately say, put it back to the proper amount. Then we'll have gone through a lot of paperwork to get to the same number, and what will have been the point of it. Again, disbursements can be requested every 3 months for costs incurred or to be incurred. It is a two-part process. You're going to be submitting 2 documents to the department. The first is a copy of your disbursement authorization request letter, and the second is the RCR form documenting that the disbursement was made. The instructions for filling out a disbursement notification are here. Again, it tells you all the sections you need to complete. We're going to focus on C, D, and G. And we do have a model form letter for disbursement on our website. It looks like this. It's going to be on your letterhead as the LSRP. It's going to be sent to the bank or the trustee. And it says how much is asked to be disbursed and who that money should go to. It can be the grantor, the LSRP, a third-party consultant. It is signed by both the LSRP and the person responsible for conducting remediation. Both parties have to sign this letter certifying that these are actual remediation costs and that no disbursement request has been made in the last 3 months. Conveniently, we're already copied on it, so you can't forget to send it to us. So then we're going to go ahead to section C, and you can see that technically disbursement is a change in amount, so we've checked the change in amount box as well as the remediation funding source disbursement notification pursuant to 512A. The next box down is if you have a direct oversight version of a trust fund. That's the disbursement request from 512B. And the one underneath that, I think somebody had a question earlier, that's when you're requesting a disbursement from pooled funds that the department is currently holding. So section D. Again, you're telling us if it's RFS or FA. For disbursement, it should be RFS. What's your mechanism? For disbursement, should be trust fund or line of credit. Then the expiration date. And again, technically, there is no expiration date on a trust fund, but with the annual verification, this one's going to expire in May. For item 2, again, you're putting the amount that we currently know about. And yes, we want to disperse, and we're dispersing by $40,000. Real quick, I want to take a minute to address interest. The interest always needs to be reported in your annual evaluation and verification. However, it doesn't really need to be reported here. There's conflicting information on that, but for simplicity, if you have a trust fund, it was $260,000, you're dispersing 40, what's remaining is $220. It doesn't need to be $220,611.43. But do report the full amount in your annual valuation. So you can see we skipped right from section D to section G. If this were an annual, you'd be doing E and F, but G is where your disbursement information goes. So the first thing is tell us the date of this last disbursement. This makes it clear that it's been at least 3 months since your last request. Tell us the date of the letter you sent to the trustee or lending institution. How much are you asking for? What's the date the trustee or bank cut the check? And then how much is left in your RFS? You're not going to hear from the department when you submit a disbursement request that's LSRP directed unless there's an issue. Otherwise, assume we know about it, it's documented, and moving on. Do another one in 3 months.
Okay, we're going to do the last test your knowledge for the webinar. True or false, disbursement of monies from an RFS is a 2-step process. A, true, B, false. Audience, A, true, B, false. Okay. Bill Call had mentioned earlier that the New Jersey Site Remediation Conference is coming up. It's on February 4th and February 5th in 2020. Site Remediation Waste Management is sending staff to man a table for that day, sort of a meet the regulators function. I will be there, as well as Lynn Mitchell. Also Atwood will be there. Tyrone Davis from Bureau of Information Systems will be there, and Jerry Hahn will also be attending for inspection and review. So we look forward to meeting folks that perhaps are in the room today or on the webinar. Stop by and see us. And where am I? we good? Nope, 10 more seconds. Done. Go ahead, Jen.
So the
Advan-
correct answer
Okay.
is true. Disbursements are a two-step process. Okay, so changing the mechanism. In order to change the mechanism, you have to submit almost a whole new package. You're going to submit the remediation cost review form, the new original mechanism, the 1% surcharge if it's applicable. When is it applicable? Essentially, if you're going from a self-guarantee to anything else, it's applicable. For financial assurance, not applicable. There is no 1% surcharge on financial assurance. If you've already paid for the year, your 1% surcharge, you don't have to pay again. Oh, for letters of credit, lines of credit, a lot of people are always concerned that they don't have the original to send to us. Those come directly from the lending institution to the department. So you don't have to wait. If you can get your hands on a copy to submit, that always helps us, but you don't have to wait for the original letter of credit or lines of credit. Also, it's automatic. Once the new one is approved, the existing RFS or FA mechanism we're holding will be released to you. So again, we're going to look at the form under section C. You're going to check the box that says change in remediation funding source or financial assurance mechanism. There's actually really no need to check the requests for release. You can if you want, but again, we have no authority to hold two mechanisms. Once the next one is approved, we release the one we're holding. So section D is where all the magic happens when you're changing mechanisms. We finally get to use the column on the right-hand side. And essentially, you're going to tell us, again, is it RFS or FA? Which mechanism on the left-hand side is the one we have currently in our possession. On the right-hand side is the new one. This example goes from a self-guarantee to an environmental insurance policy. This would never happen in real life, but why not? Again, the expiration date, May 2020. That must be in the fiscal year ends December 31st for this self-guarantee. And we have the amount, $537,918.02, and we're not changing that amount. We're just changing the mechanism. Oh, there was more to that. So once you submit this slide, again, you're going to sign your certifications, and then you're just going to sit back and wait for your copy of the release letter. If you don't hear anything from us and you're expecting a release, definitely contact us because releases should be done in a timely manner. Okay. Another change. This is a change in one of the persons, one of the entities that are responsible. There's so many. You can have an RFS provider, a co-permittee, a permittee, the RFS responsible party, the person conducting remediation. Any of these changes, as always, we need the remediation cost review form. But then you want to ask yourself, what's actually changing? Is it just a contact in the same entity? Is it a whole brand new entity somehow taking over? Is the address changing? Is it a new property owner for a permit? All of these questions are going to lead you to the fact that you may need to submit a million other forms. ISRA remediation certification, the only way to transfer ISRA liability and RFS liability on an ISRA case. The site and contact update information form. If you send this straight to BCANE because your SRP contacts are changing, there's a good chance, about 90%, the RFS contacts will also be updated. The reverse is not true. If you tell us in RFS that your contact has changed, we're not changing anything in SRP world. So you need to send in your site contact update form. I'll go through this here. So again, with the RCR form, you can change for RFS a contact. You can change going from Marcus to Priscilla in the same company. That's fine. You can change your address. You can change your phone number. You cannot change ISRA liability, and you you want to try to figure out, like, if the entity is actually changing, what's really happening behind this. On a permit, you always have two co-permittees, right? You have the person that conducted the remediation and you have the property owner. So if that property gets sold, you have 60 days to notify the department that there's a new property owner and that new property owner now needs to be a permittee. You submit the remedial action permit, transfer / change of property ownership application. If you're changing an address on the person conducting remediation or the property owner, you actually need a RAP modification application. Very different than for RFS. The only way to change the address is with the modification. Finally, the only way to not be the person responsible for conducting remediation on a RAP is if you no longer exist. And that would require also submitting documentation substantiating that you no longer exist and a RAP modification application form. Another change you can do is transferring your RFS to FA. Again, as Joe pointed out, RFS is always the FA amounts are included in your RFS as you go along. And then you, at some point, get to the point where there's nothing else left to do but get your RAP approval and issue your REO. So when you get to this point, as long as you don't have a self-guarantee, there's no further contaminated areas of concern, you've already submitted your RAP application saying, hey, I want to use my RFS as my FA. We get the FA amount proper in the mechanism that we have, amending it, either reducing or increasing it. We're going to change the language. And then essentially you're submitting the RCR form saying, hey, use my remediation funding source as financial assurance under Section C. And if all these conditions are met, we're actually going to close your RFS activity, transfer the file to BRAP, and now you have FA. For more information, you can again look at the June 2019 training on this particular subject. So those are all the changes you can make. Again, I want to point out you're probably not doing them one at a time as I've illustrated. It's probably going to be your annual with a change in contact and a change in amount. So just make sure you're checking all the appropriate boxes and providing all the documentation required. And that's it.
Questions?
In your example where you were changing, the first one, you were just increasing your amount of your letter of credit, wouldn't you have needed a new letter of credit? Why did you only have the existing mechanism and not a new mechanism?
Okay, so you don't need an actual new mechanism. It's like you get an amendment or they just increase the value of the line of credit already established.
If it was something other than the letter of credit, would it require a new mechanism?
So for a letter of credit, we get amendments. So it's the same letter of credit, but they just issue an amendment for the new value amount. Trust accounts, it's just you're increasing or decreasing the amount in the actual account. Trying to think, self-guarantee, you don't need a new mechanism. Environmental insurance policies, I think they issue, I don't know what it's called, but essentially like an addendum to the environmental insurance policy as well. So no, you don't need a brand new mechanism. It is an option, you know, if you wanted to also switch at the same time, like if they wouldn't give you more for the line of credit, for instance, you know, but no, it can just be the same one.
Thank you.
Any other questions in the room? All right, we have one question on the webinar from Lisa Naran on the RFS FA form for expiration date of RFS or FA question. How do we answer for letter of credit? I just lost the question.
It said if it auto renews.
Thank
So basically, yes, it auto renews, but there is an expiration date, and then every year on that date, it renews till the next year. So there is an actual date, and you just put the most current expiration date coming up.
Great. On the RAP Addendum B, question 5C and 6, aren't the values the same of your RFS, or maybe if your RFS includes your FA? We'll get back to you on that.
Yes, thank you.
And the last question is, it does not seem proper to check box in section C of RFS FA form that says change in RFS or FA amount pursuant to 726C 5.11 for disbursements. Disbursements are not inclusive of situations described in 5.11, which involve changes to scope of work / cost estimate, not simple disbursements. It does not seem proper to check change in RFS amount. Okay, thank you for your comment, Thomas. Sorry, I thought I was getting to a question. Okay, I thought in the beginning you indicated disbursements require department approval, but later stated the LSRP could approve disbursements. Can you clarify? And that's Marie Lewis.
I can. So there are two types of disbursements. Some are LSRP directed and some do require department approval. It really depends on your mechanism. Again, you want to check paragraph 4 of your Remediation Trust Fund or your line of credit agreement. Christina.
Quick question, David Nintentola, Chile Environmental. When is the RP / LSRP responsible for, I guess, increasing the RFS if they've discovered new contamination?
So technically within 30 days of discovery. It's normally done on the annual, but you are supposed to tell us within 30 days of discovering your cost estimate has increased.
Well, then the question leads to, how does the department know until the LSRP signs the?
Don't you have to like swear an oath when you take the LSRP exam or something?
Yeah, I wish I
I'm
did
not
that, because
sure.
then,
Honestly, we won't know until you tell us. That's the bottom line, but we hope that everybody is upfront and doing what they're supposed to do as an LSRP.
Any other questions in the room? Okay, great. Oh, wait, there's one more question on the webinar
oh,
that
he's got
I
away.
do have time to take. I'm sorry.
Okay.
For a RAP being maintained by a homeowners association, the compliance schedule includes annual submission of the HOA budget in addition to biennial certification. Does this submission need to be attached to the RCR/RFSFA form, or is there another mechanism for submission?
Please include the RCR form.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Jen.
Is that yours? It's mine now.
Okay. The culmination of all your hard work, RFS and FA release.
Yeah, so we're talking about getting your money back. Far too often I hear from LSRPs and from responsible entities, how do I get my money back? When do I get my money back? Okay, this is what it boils down to. This is the regulatory requirements under RX 511E1 from the RFS perspective. If a person has substitute one form of RFS for something else, we'll release the original one. If somebody else posts RFS for somebody else, we'll release the original one. And then finally, if the department or the LSRP has issued the final remediation document, the department will release the funding source. By final remediation document, what we mean is response action outcomes, no further actions, remediation in progress waiver, or an USTA waiver, okay? For the most part, from the RFS perspective, Jen just heavily covered the first two bullets. I'm going to be focusing on the third bullet, final remediation document. From the financial assurance perspective, when do you get your money back? Well, if a permittee is substituted another form of FA, or if somebody else has posted FA, you can have your FA released. If the department has modified the RAP to reflect a determination by the LSRP that the remedy is no longer warrants or requires an engineering control, if we have that written determination, you can have your financial assurance released. Or if the department has terminated the remedial action permit, okay? We're going to focus on the last two in terms of releases. When filing for a release from the RFS perspective, meaning you do have the final remediation document issued, you're going to send us the remediation cost review, RFS-FA form. In section C, you're going to check off release. It's heavily recommended that you provide us a copy of the final remediation document We ask that you ensure all fees and department fees have been paid prior to requesting a release. Now, please be advised, you're supposed to do that before you issue the RAO. If you didn't, believe we're going to check it again before we give you your money back, okay? So just make sure that takes place. From an ISRA perspective, if you are requesting a release and you issued a response action outcome, what you need to do is end your ISRA liability, meaning the scope of the response action outcome should be industrial establishment per NJAC 726B dash entire site, leasehold, list your ISRA case. If what you did indeed is issue a bunch of REOAs for each of your area concerns, I can't release your money. You still have an open ISRA liability. You have to close the loop. You have to close the ISRA case, okay? When filing for your RFS release, a lot of times folks will send it along with the response action outcome to the department, all one neat package. That's great. Sometimes BCAN doesn't separate it, doesn't pull it out. I never see it. If you're sending it at the same time, do me a favor, send it to me electronically as well so that I'm at least aware that you're doing this. From a filing for a FA for release, we're going to focus on the final two. Again, release, we need the remediation cost review, RFS FA form, section C, release, and then give us a copy of the determination or the termination of the permit. It's kind of hard to say, termination, either way. When it comes time to do the actual release, we will issue a termination release approval letter. It'll go directly to the lender, the trustee, the insurance company, whoever. If you're maintaining a self-guarantee, our release format is an email essentially to all the parties, because let's face it, we're not actually holding money in a self-guarantee. We can get away with an email. We will copy the PRCR, we will copy the LSRP, and of course we'll copy any known involved attorneys and anybody else who's requested. Be advised, if it is a letter of credit, we are mandated to return the original letter of credit in order for the release to take place. We have to send it directly back to the lender. Bottom line, folks, the department prioritizes releases. I mandate with my staff that we get them out within 10 business days. If somebody is entitled to get their money back, we want to work quickly. If it's been 2 weeks and you haven't heard anything, haven't seen anything, something's wrong. Call us, okay? The release request got lost. The REO has been determined to be has not been determined to be administratively complete. Something is wrong. More than 2 weeks, please call or email. Jem and Cloud. You like that? That's it. Questions?
Anyone in the room have questions? Webinar? Okay.
That's
Thank
it?
you, Atwood. Yes.
Thank you.
Joe's going to tie up some information on data miner.
Hello again. These slides were prepared to provide more of a roadmap on how to negotiate through data miner and how to use it to find RFS amounts. Basically, you're on the DEP homepage, there are two methods, there are two methods for researching RFS. There may be more, but I'm going to go through two. You go to the data miner website, click search by category. What you'll do is you'll click on the keyword tab. If you type in financial and then hit submit, you'll get these two returns. It doesn't matter which one you select, they both take you to the same place. Type in the PI number for your site and hit submit. And then you'll come to this page. You can either click on the RFS tab, you can scroll over to RFS using these numbers, or you can download it in PDF and Excel format. And then ultimately, you'll get this information where you can get the RFS number. It is not the same as your PI number. You get your total RFS amount, the amount posted, the entity you posted it, the type of financial mechanism, etc. Method two, once again, homepage of data miner. Click on the category, search by category. This time, instead of you keep it in category, you select site remediation in the drop-down menu, hit submit. You'll have to scroll down to sites and cases, and immediately underneath that is active remediation funding source report. Once again, you can type in the PI number or the RFS number, submit, and you'll come back to the same information, in which case you can also download it again. Not much to it. Researching financial assurance on data miner. Unfortunately, you're currently out of luck. You cannot search or research FA amounts on data miner. You unfortunately still need to submit an open request to get these numbers if you don't already have them. And the DEP is working on it. Questions? Yeah.
All right, doesn't
Thank
look
you.
like we have any questions in the room. Thank you, Joe. Any questions on the webinar? No. You guys have been so thorough, thank you. But to round this out, let's do some frequently asked questions and have the whole panel up here. Jen, Atwood, Joe, grab a mic. Somebody can have mine. Thanks. Yeah, you can just turn them on.
Sing and dance.
Hang on, folks. We're going to get this sorted out. We just got to figure out who wants to stand anywhere. I refuse to stand over there because I never know what to do with my hands. You know. Just before we get this kick started, I want to let you know we collectively got together as a group to go over the questions that we get most often. That's the whole purpose of this. This is kind of like the greatest hits of the same question that we get over and over and over and over again. So we decided to try and memorialize it in this portion of the training event. Okay, so without further ado, go get them, Joe.
All right, I have the hardest job. I am reading the question. The site has a CEA. Do I have to use the $250,000 surrogate amount?
So the answer is yes. You have known groundwater contamination. If you're using the surrogate amount, it has to be $250,000. What it boils down to is without the PASI being conducted, how do you know you haven't contributed to the groundwater issue? Okay, we need 250 up front if you're using the surrogate amount. But as we've covered in the training today, you do have the ability to create a site-specific cost estimate number, which could get you under the 250. But if you're looking at groundwater, if you're looking at surrogate amount, it is $250,000.
Question 2, we have multiple or multi-tenant ISRA transactions occurring. Can I post only $100,000?
No, you may not. First, this assumes that $100,000 is the proper surrogate amount. We're just going to go with that and say that it is. But then you need to post that $100,000 for each tenant, for each trigger. It's not the same as if one tenant has multiple triggers, meaning they're ceasing and selling the property. That's one GIN, one REMCERT, one case, one $100,000. But when it's multi-tenant, each tenant needs their own $100,000 RFS.
Question 3, the developer plans on constructing what will be the cap, so installation of the engineering control costs do not need to be included, correct?
What? No, no, no. So look, you're required to maintain RFS and the estimated cost to complete the remediation. That's the whole thing. Even if some developer is going to do the cap later and they're responsible for it, we need the money posted and incorporated in the amount of RFS that's being maintained. If the lead PRCR falls out of financial favor, has a failure to remediate, the department needs the funds to establish the cap. So if they're not represented here because some other guy's doing it, I don't have the money to get the engineering control installed.
Question 4, the purchaser will be responsible for the permit or the permittee will be exempt from FA, so O&M costs can be excluded, correct?
So jumping right off of what Atwood just said, this is essentially the same scenario. We need that money covered in the remediation funding source until the application for the permit is actually submitted. At that point, this other person is posting the financial assurance, or you're going to be confirmed to be exempt from FA. Until then, the O&M costs are in your RFS.
What we like to say is it's yours until you have a permit that says it's his, okay?
Question 5, the annual 1% surcharge invoice was already issued, but my cost estimate has changed. Can my invoice be adjusted?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, this happens quite often. The reality is we issue a 1% surcharge invoices 60 days in advance. It's more of a product of our NGEM's billing system. It's something that we're going to try and fix in the future, but it's a costly fix. So as a result, as long as you can come in with your annual cost review within that 60-day window of when the invoice is expected to be paid, we absolutely will adjust your surcharge, provided we review it and we agree with the changes. So this absolutely can be done.
Question 6, I am not eligible to self-guarantee based on my fiscal year-end financial statements. Can I use my most recent quarterly statement instead?
No. Eligibility for a self-guarantee is based solely on the fiscal year-end annual report. It's encouraging that your quarterly report is looking good. You can probably reapply next year.
Don't laugh. This gets asked a lot. Like, I know last year didn't look so good, but this year, this is our year.
So what we're learning is if you have a question, the answer is going to be no. Question 7, in theory, the amount of RFS required to be maintained decreases over time. Is it possible for FA to decrease over time? And if so, how?
Yes, provided we're talking about a non-permanent engineering control. Things like groundwater pump and tree systems have expected life, have expected LSRP calculated duration. As the time the system is in place goes on, our duration is going to decrease. Therefore, we're not going to need as much financial assurance. Now, as very clear, if it is a permanent engineering control, we do require that you represent 30 years in perpetuity. But what we're talking about now is a non-permanent engineering control. So you have the ability to have your financial assurance reduced over time. You have the option, you can wait for your biannual certification and you can file for a reduction at that time with your biannual certification. Or the moment you know you have more posted than you need, you can file for a reduction at that point in time as well.
Last question, I believe. Question 8, will biennial groundwater sampling need to be included in my RFS when targeting monitored natural attenuation as the groundwater remedial action? Upon securing a groundwater wrap, will FA be necessary for this remedy?
So I think we already had a preview of this question earlier today in our training, but the answer is that all remediation costs required to support that M&A is a viable remedy for your site need to be included as RFS. That's going to include things like installing your monitoring wells, doing your sampling, the cost to get your analytical results. So all of those need to be included, including the 8 quarterly sampling rounds in order to show the downward trend. All of those need to be in the RFS. Once you apply for your permit, no, it's just an institutional control. Well, it's M&A. You're not having an engineering control, so there's no need to post financial assurance.
Okay, so this one's me. Just to pound home one more time, we have an RFS website. So if you get a chance, please check it out. I think you'll be surprised with how great it is. And you can point out all the areas that we need to fix now because it's Sarah 2.0. That is my email address. That is my phone number. If you have any questions, something we haven't addressed today, you want to talk to me later, or maybe you just want to catch up, give me a call later. Before we open up to questions real quick, I just want to take the time to say thank all of you for giving us the opportunity to come and speak with you today. It does mean a lot. I want to say a quick thank you to Joe Purse for taking time out of his busy schedule to support this and do the detailed cost estimate section with us. We greatly appreciate it. And also thank you to Jen McLeod for being involved in this. Jen, yes, you are a rock star.
And thank you, Atwood,
Oh,
being the
he's
great
so
coordinator.
cute, Atwood.
Is everybody welling up? We're all welling up? All right, so any questions?
All right.
Oh, boy.
Okay,
Yeah,
your frequently asked questions are wonderful, but I want to take a slight turn on the cost of cap question. Your frequently asked questions envisioned the developer was going to build some thing, right? That the cap theoretically might be a building or a series of asphalt parking lots and so forth and so on. If the department took that money over to do it, you're not going to build a building
No,
or
we're
an
not.
asphalt parking lot. You're going to put 2 feet of clean stone down
More than
and
likely,
call
we're
it a
gonna put a
cap.
fence around it.
So,
Yeah.
or right, or more likely a fence. So for our purposes, should we envision the least cost protective cap or something else?
So of course we want more money. More money is better. But the reality is it's whatever the cost of the engineering control is that you are currently envisioning. It's way different once you have a raw that says, I'm going to put, an asphalt cap across this 500 acres. But if earlier on in the SIRI phase, when you're projecting what your cost out, if you're anticipating the costs associated with a fence, yeah, that would be perfectly acceptable.
Maybe just a follow-on question on that too. Assuming you have sufficient engineering controls in place, existing buildings, parking lots, et cetera, you can use that and explain that although you need an engineering control, it's already in place and there's a reduced cost or.
Absolutely. The existing structures in place already serving that purpose. We simply need the justification, the professional judgment.
Hey, Edward. I've got a couple of condo association clients that have
Is
multi-story.
this I have a site? Is that what we're doing right now?
I got two.
I have a site.
The question is the financial assurance. A lot of times these outfits have management companies, property managers, and very often there's no one on their board who's there permanently. That they vote people in. So folks that have to sign the forms and whatnot. I had a situation where the management company changed. I submitted a biennial cert and they asked to change the remedial action permit. Basically, the address changed. Is there another way to do it besides modifying a permit when you're changing? That's it?
No, if there's an address change on one of the co-permittees, we need the RAP modification application.
Any other questions in the audience? Okay. Oh, so sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry, Atwood. I just wanted to ask you to explain if I have a multi-tenanted building, let's say 4 tenants under ISRA, so I have 4 gins and I need 4 RFSs posted. Can I post just one total RFS? You're welcome.
Thanks, Bill.
Bill Goodman, everyone.
Bill Goodwin, B. Kane. The other half, the Isra that I have to deal with. We did answer it, but we're going to answer it to be more clearly. The mandate is that remediation funding source is required to be established and maintained. There's nothing in our regulations that stipulates a separate and distinct RFS mechanism has to be obtained. If you are posting one mechanism for multiple triggering events, multiple sites, etc., there are certain things you need to understand. In terms of annual reporting requirements, are your anniversaries on the same date? If they're not, you're going to mess up your annual reporting requirements. If they are on the same date, cool. If you post one mechanism and one of the sites messes up out of the 4, I step up and take all of your money. I don't have the ability to do a partial pull. Everybody goes into this process with the thought, well, we're going to do the right thing. Of course you are, and we hope that you do, but that is what's at risk here. You mess up on one, we pull all. Now you have 4 sites without money, 4 sites out of compliance.
Okay, we have one question for Joe on the webinar. Can you clarify which NJDEP fees should be included in the RFS? Can you reference where in the regs guidance it says that only 1 year of fees is required? Does this mean if you contemplate a groundwater RAP, but it will not be issued for over a year, it should not be included in the RFS?
All right, well, let me answer the first question. The closest thing to a regulatory or guidance citation for only 1 year of fees is actually the checklist for completing RFS. There's no formal statement that says don't do it, but I wanted to actually include that in the training so that it is understood that it is DEP policies that you only have to put in 1 year of fees as part of your RFS cost estimate. As for the second question, regarding DEP fees, so if you're going to be submitting a groundwater RAP application, but it's not going to be happening for over a year, that is correct. You do not need to post that as part of your RFS. The most common fees would be your 1% annual surcharge. If you have an IEC or a VC, some of the case oversight charges may be applicable.
Do you guys want to add to that?
I just want to clarify one thing. So you need to only post 1 year's worth of fees, meaning 1 year's worth of your 1% surcharge, 1 year's worth of your annual remediation fees. You do need to include your RAP application fee for 1 year. What we don't need is like, oh, we're going to take 10 years to complete this remediation. We need 10 years worth of your annual remediation fee. And then every year when you do your cost estimate, that 1 year fee cost is in your estimate. Like essentially the thought is you're going to pay that, so it'd be reduced, but next year you still owe that, so you got to put it back in. And so it's just 1 year's worth every year representing the fees.
And the reality is after that 1 year's worth of fee, if we find ourselves in a situation of failure to remediate and we have to pull the money, I already have 1 year's worth of the fees built in to pay the department back. Moving forward, we're not going to bill ourselves. So 1 year's worth of fees is adequate. We have Karen.
Does that include case management fees if you have a case manager? Repeat the question so I hear it.
I got it.
Do those 1 year fees include case management fees if you have a case team?
Yes, it'll be basically the department's oversight cost for that 1 year. We get frequently, well, how do I know what that is? Well, we bill you quarterly for it. If you have multiple years worth of quarterly bills from it, it's perfectly acceptable to run a trailing average. Or what we stipulate is you can take 1 year's worth of remediation costs, money that you're going to spend during that year doing remediation, and take 10% of it, and we'll accept that as well.
I'm sorry, can you wait for the mic?
If you choose a remediation trust fund as your mechanism, should you include in the estimate the cost to manage the trust fund? And the second part of that is, can you pay the cost to manage from the remediation cost from the trust fund itself?
Okay, so from a cost perspective, it being represented as RFS, I wouldn't include that because it doesn't meet the definition of remediation cost, okay, to maintain it. And frequently when trusts are set up, the fees automatically come out from the lender from the total amount, okay? Are you aware of any trust that doesn't occur? Unless you pay out of pocket separately to maintain it.
An attorney is managing.
Right. But again, under attorney circumstances, 9 times out of 10, they have it in an ILO to trust or escrow account that it's not really earning interest because that money gets shipped off to charity. The money doesn't fluctuate. It's pretty much you're paying for their attorney fees to essentially do what they do with the money.
Okay. Any other questions in the room? All right.
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Atwood. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you to all the participants. Have a great night.